File 28.
From where we lay, we could look down a brown aisle, arched with green, formed by the trunks and branches. Along this, a party of the ape-men were passing. They went in single file, with bent legs and rounded backs, their hands occasionally touching the ground, their heads turning to left and right as they trotted along. Their crouching gait took away from their height, but I should put them at 5 feet or so, with long arms and enormous chests. Many of them carried sticks, and at the distance they looked like a line of very hairy and deformed human beings. For a moment I caught this clear glimpse of them. Then they were lost among the bushes. "Not this time," said Lord John, who had caught up his rifle. "Our best chance is to lie quiet until they've given up the search. Then we shall see whether we can't get back to their town and hit 'em where it hurts most. Give 'em an hour, and we'll march." We filled in the time by opening one of our food tins and making sure of our breakfast. Lord Roxton had had nothing but some fruit since the morning before, and ate like a starving man. Then, at last, our pockets bulging with cartridges and a rifle in each hand, we started off upon our mission of rescue. Before leaving it, we carefully marked our little hiding-place among the brushwood, and its bearing to Fort Challenger, that we might find it again if we needed it. We slunk through the bushes in silence, until we came to the very edge of the cliff, close to the old camp. Then we halted, and Lord John gave me some idea of his plans. "Well, so long as we're among the thick trees, these swine are our masters," said he. "They can see us, and we cannot see them. But in the open it's different. There we can move faster than they, so we must stick to the open all we can. The edge of the plateau has fewer large trees than further inland, so that's our line of advance. Go slowly, keep your eyes open and your rifle ready. Above all, never let them get you prisoner while there's a cartridge left. That's my last word to you, young fellow." When we reached the edge of the cliff, I looked over and saw our good old black Zambo sitting smoking on a rock below us. I would have given a great deal to have hailed him and told him how we were placed, but it was too dangerous, lest we should be heard. The woods seemed to be full of the ape-men. Again and again we heard their curious clicking chatter. At such times we plunged into the nearest clump of bushes and lay still until the sound had passed away. Our advance, therefore, was very slow, and 2 hours at least must have passed before I saw by Lord John's cautious movements that we must be close to our destination. He motioned me to lie still, and he crawled forward himself. In a minute he was back again, his face quivering with eagerness. "Come," said he. "Come, quick! I hope to the Lord we're not too late already." I found myself shaking with nervous excitement as I scrambled forward and lay down beside him, looking out through the bushes at a clearing which stretched before us. It was a sight which I shall never forget until my dying day. So weird, so impossible, that I do not know how I am to make you realize it, or how, in a few years, I shall bring myself to believe in it, if I live to sit once more on a lounge in the Savage Club and look out on the drab solidity of the embankment. I know that it will seem then to be some wild nightmare, some delirium of fever. Yet I will set it down now, while it is still fresh in my memory, and one, at least, The man who lay in the damp grass by my side will know if I have lied. A wide, open space lay before us, some hundreds of yards across, all green turf and low bracken growing to the very edge of the cliff. Round this clearing there was a semicircle of trees with curious huts built of foliage, piled one above the other among the branches. A rookery, with every nest a little house, would best convey the idea. The openings of these huts and the branches of the trees were thronged with a dense mob of ape people, whom, from their size, I took to be the females and infants of the tribe. They formed the background of the picture, and were all looking out with eager interest at the same scene which fascinated and bewildered us. In the open, and near the edge of the cliff, there had assembled a crowd of some 100 of these shaggy red-haired creatures, many of them of immense size, and all of them horrible to look upon. There was a certain discipline among them, for none of them attempted to break the line which had formed. In front there stood a small group of Indians, little clean-limbed red fellows, whose skins glowed like polished bronze in the strong sunlight. A tall, thin, white man was standing beside them, his head bowed, his arms folded, his whole attitude expressive of his horror and dejection. There was no mistaking the angular form of Professor Summerlee. In front of and around this dejected group of prisoners were several ape-men who watched them closely and made all escape impossible. Then, right out from all the others, and close to the edge of the cliff, were two figures, so strange and, under other circumstances, so ludicrous, that they absorbed my attention. The one was our comrade, Professor Challenger. The remains of his coat still hung from his shoulders, but his shirt had been all torn out, and his great beard merged itself in the black tangle which covered his mighty chest. He had lost his hat, and his hair, which had grown long in our wanderings, was flying in wild disorder. A single day seemed to have changed him from the highest product of modern civilization to the most desperate savage in South America. Beside him stood his master, the king of the ape-men. In all things he was, as Lord John had said, the very image of our professor, save that his colouring was red instead of black. The same short, broad figure, the same heavy shoulders, the same forward hang of the arms, the same bristling beard, merging itself in the hairy chest. Only above the eyebrows, where the sloping forehead and low curved skull of the ape-man were in sharp contrast to the broad brow and magnificent cranium of the European, could one see any marked difference. At every other point, the king was an absurd parody of the professor. All this, which takes me so long to describe, impressed itself upon me in a few seconds. Then we had very different things to think of, for an active drama was in progress. Two of the ape-men had seized one of the Indians out of the group and dragged him forward to the edge of the cliff. The king raised his hand as a signal. They caught the man up by his leg and arm, and swung him 3 times backwards and forwards with tremendous violence. Then, with a frightful heave, they shot the poor wretch over the precipice. With such force did they throw him that he curved high in the air before beginning to drop. As he vanished from sight, the whole assembly, except the guards, rushed forward to the edge of the precipice, and there was a long pause of absolute silence, broken by a mad yell of delight. They sprang about, tossing their long hairy arms in the air and howling with exultation. Then they fell back from the edge, formed themselves again into line, and waited for the next victim. This time it was Summerlee. 2 of his guards caught him by the wrists and pulled him brutally to the front. His thin figure and long limbs struggled and fluttered like a chicken being dragged from a coop. Challenger had turned to the king and waved his hands frantically before him. He was begging, pleading, imploring for his comrade's life. The ape-man pushed him roughly aside and shook his head. It was the last conscious movement he was to make upon earth. Lord John's rifle cracked, and the king sank down, a tangled red, sprawling thing upon the ground. "Shoot! Shoot into the thick of them! Shoot, sonny! Shoot!" cried my companion. There are strange red depths in the soul of the most commonplace man. I am tender-hearted by nature, and have found my eyes moist many a time over the scream of a wounded hare. Yet the bloodlust was on me now. I found myself on my feet, emptying one magazine, then the other, clicking open the breech to reload, snapping it to again, while cheering and yelling with pure ferocity and joy of slaughter as I did so. With our 4 guns, the 2 of us made a horrible havoc. Both the guards who held Summerlee were down, and he was staggering about like a drunken man in his amazement, unable to realize that he was a free man. The dense mob of ape-men ran about in bewilderment, marvelling whence this storm of death was coming, or what it might mean. They waved, gesticulated, screamed, and tripped up over those who had fallen. Then, with a sudden impulse, they all rushed into a howling crowd to the trees for shelter, leaving the ground behind them spotted with their stricken comrades. The prisoners were left for the moment standing alone in the middle of the clearing. Challenger's quick brain had grasped the situation. He seized the bewildered Summerlee by the arm, and they both ran towards us. 2 of their guards bounded after them, and fell to 2 bullets from Lord John. We ran forward into the open to meet our friends, and pressed a loaded rifle into the hands of each. But Summerlee was at the end of his strength. He could hardly totter. Already the ape-men were recovering from their panic. They were coming through the brushwood and threatening to cut us off. Challenger and I ran Summerlee along, one at each of his elbows, while Lord John covered our retreat, firing again and again as savage heads snarled at us out of the bushes. For a mile or more the chattering brutes were at our very heels. Then the pursuit slackened, for they'd learned our power, and would no longer face that unerring rifle. When we had at last reached the camp, we looked back and found ourselves alone. So it seemed to us, and yet we were mistaken. We had hardly closed the thornbush door of Azariba, clasped each other's hands, and thrown ourselves panting upon the ground beside our spring, when we heard a patter of feet, and then a gentle, plaintive crying from outside our entrance. Lord Roxton rushed forward, rifle in hand, and threw it open. There, prostrate upon their faces, lay the little red figures of the 4 surviving Indians, trembling with fear of us, and yet imploring our protection. With an expressive sweep of his hands, one of them pointed to the woods around them, and indicated that they were full of danger. Then, darting forward, he threw his arms around Lord John's legs, and rested his face upon them. "By George!" cried Lord John, pulling at his moustache in great perplexity. "I say, what the deuce am I to do with these people? Get up, little chappie. Take your face off my boots. Summerlee was sitting up and stuffing some tobacco into his old briar. "We've got to see them safe," said he. "You've pulled us all out of the jaws of death. My word, it was a good bit of work." "Admirable!" cried Challenger. "Admirable! Not only we as individuals, but European science collectively owe you a deep debt of gratitude for what you have done. I do not hesitate to say that the disappearance of Professor Summerlee and myself would have left an appreciable gap in modern zoological history. Our young friend here and you have done most excellently well." He beamed at us with the old paternal smile, but European science would have been somewhat amazed could they have seen their chosen child, the hope of the future, with his tangled, unkempt head, his bare chest, and his tattered clothes. He had one of the meat tins between his knees, and sat with a large piece of cold Australian mutton between his fingers. The Indian looked up at him, and then, with a little yelp, cringed to the ground and clung to Lord John's leg. "Don't you be scared, me bonny boy," said Lord John, patting the matted head in front of him. "He can't stick your appearance, Challenger, and by George I don't wonder. All right, little chap, he's only a human, just the same as the rest of us." "Oh, really, sir?" cried the Professor. "Well, it's lucky for you, Challenger, that you are a little out of the ordinary. If you hadn't been so like the King—" "Upon my word, Lord John Roxton, you allow yourself great latitude." "Well, it's a fact." "I beg, sir, that you will change the subject. Your remarks are irrelevant and unintelligible. The question before us is what we are to do with these Indians. The obvious thing is to escort them home, if we knew where their home was." "There's no difficulty about that," said I. "They live in the caves on the other side of the central lake." "Our young friend here knows where they live. I gather that it's some distance." "A good 20 miles, said I. Summerlee gave a groan. "I, for one, could never get there. Surely I hear those brutes still howling upon our track?" As he spoke, from the dark recesses of the woods, we heard far away the gibbering cry of the ape-men. The Indians once more set up a feeble wail of fear. "We must move, and move quick," said Lord John. "You help Summerlee, young fellow. These Indians'll carry stores. Now then, come along, before they can see us." In less than half an hour we had reached our brushwood retreat and concealed ourselves. All day we heard the excited calling of the ape-men in the direction of our old camp, but none of them came our way, and the tired fugitives, red and white, had a long, deep sleep. I was dozing myself in the evening when someone plucked my sleeve, and I found Challenger kneeling beside me. "You keep a diary of these events, and you expect eventually to publish it, Mr. Malone," said he with solemnity. "I am only here as a press reporter," I answered. "Exactly. You may have heard some rather fatuous remarks of Lord John Roxton's which seemed to imply that there was some resemblance." "Yes, I heard them." "Well, I need not say that any publicity given to such an idea, any levity in your narrative of what occurred, would be exceedingly offensive to me." "I will keep well within the truth." "Lord John's observations are frequently exceedingly fanciful, and he is capable of attributing the most absurd reasons to the respect which is always shown by the most undeveloped races to dignity and character. You follow my meaning? Entirely. I leave the matter to your discretion. Then, after a long pause, he added, The king of the ape-men was really a creature of great distinction, a most remarkably handsome and intelligent personality. Did it not strike you? A most remarkable creature, said I. And the professor, much eased in his mind, settled down